Good morning, and welcome to Talking in Stations. I'm your host today, Carneros from the Bastion. With me, I have our regular panel. We've got Artemis Albosa from Mercenary Coalition. Say hi.
Howdy, howdy. No longer from Mercenary Coalition.
Oh.
Forgot to change my title on Zoom.
Sorry, tricked me there for a second. And I've got our dear friend Matterall for Dice Corporation and Northern Coalition Dot.
Yep, we're still there.
Yay! Thanks for giving me a chance here on the horn.
Of course.
Good morning. And then we've also got special guests with us today. First, I'll go with the on-camera guest. We've got Commander A's, CEO of Sub-Zero Corporation in my own alliance, the Bastion.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning. And then we've off-camera, but with us, we've got Mitch Taylor from Dark Rising in the Wrecking Machine. Say hello to them. Let them hear your great accent.
Hey, guys. Thanks for the invite.
Nice. Thank you. Welcome to the show.
He's actually from Louisiana.
I don't think so. But great to have you on here. Today, we have some really fun subjects to discuss with you. Some of them are very current and exactly what people are talking about in the game. We've got some discussion of high-sec war decks. This came up in the CSM minutes recently. Since CCP is discussing them with the Council or Stellar Management, we thought we would also discuss them for a moment here on the show. And we've got a couple different viewpoints on the subject to encourage a discussion. In addition to that, we've got some other things to talk about here on the show. We've got a little bit of sneak preview coming up for EVE Vegas 2018, which is in less than 2 weeks. We've got a little discussion of the sovereignty warfare happening in the region of Cache. And then we'll see what other subjects pop up today. Thank you for joining us. And that's a thank you both to our live guests here on Twitch TV and a thank you to our podcast listeners later on. Both of you are important parts of our community. Thank you for coming to Talking in Stations.
Both of you podcast listeners.
Ah, nice. Love it. Okay, so let's start with the high-sec war deck subject. We've got a couple of viewpoints here, but let's introduce our guests a little bit better. So turning to Mitch Taylor for a moment, tell us about the Wrecking Machine. And if you can, tell us if it's different from Wrecking Crew, because I've heard that name too, and I'm a little confused.
I think Wrecking Crew are a band and probably a little bit more talented than we could probably claim. But basically, Wrecking Machine is an alliance within EVE Online, and our general day-to-day business is destroying structures in high-sec. So we war deck structures, reinforce them, blow them up, pick up the loot, and then share it to our members through a system of tiers. So they literally get to collect tiers for their ISK balance. History in EVE, 15 years playing. We've done pretty much everything there is to think of in terms of null-sec, low-sec, factional warfare, piracy, industry, blah, blah, blah. But that's where we are right now.
15 years in EVE, but high-sec structures are still fun to blow up.
Yeah, it's new, actually. It's all very exciting because it only arrived in the game in May 2016 with the Citadel expansion. So it's something that we'd never done. We'd conquered regions, fought empires to the ground, and high-sec was the great unknown for us in 2016.
What is your favorite target in a high-sec structure? What's the thing that you hope, because you don't do this on your own, people hire you to do it, am I correct?
No, actually, it's interesting that the perception is that we would be hired to take out structures, but actually we're not a mercenary group. So we do it literally for the love of the drama and the emotional journey that we get to take people on.
You left out the word loot.
Of course, yeah. I mean, money's everything, right? Money's king.
That's part of the reason why we assumed you might be doing this as a mercenary thing. So much of Eve seems to be driven by ISK. So I made an assumption. My apologies.
It's okay. It's quite an important point because when we did this, we decided that we wanted to provide a balanced ecosystem. So being a mercenary group would have actually taken us into the potential of either taking work away from existing merc groups that exist, or also denying people the ability to hire against us. And that was a really important point of the business model. We wanted people to have an out, and that's something that may come up later in the discussion.
Do you know any other organizations that have your focus? Meaning they're not mercenaries, they're not involved in war decks for anything other than focusing on structures.
Yeah, there's quite a few groups that have shot up in the last few years, and it seems to be growing in terms of the way that people like to play the game. It offers a very timer-based experience where you can really plan how and when you're going to play the game, which is what appealed to us, being super casuals, as we like to advertise on our website. The idea is basically that you can choose to play when you want and when you don't, but you still get to experience the excitement that can come with the many twists and turns that a particular structure might generate.
And going back to the question, did you have a favorite target that you like to hit if you can? Or are all structures basically the same? It's just a timer. It's like running missions or something.
It's really important to understand that you can get targets that just roll over and die, and that's pretty much the bread and butter. But the promise of an exciting outcome is something that really generates a lot of interest for us.
Okay, so it's not about the structure. It's about who might show up for it and the mystery.
Yeah, we've shot Reterus, and Pandemic Horde have turned up to defend it. We've shot, Sotios, and no one turned up to defend it.
How much do you research your, let's call it dance partner in advance? Do you pick your targets carefully, or do you like the mystery and you don't know who's going to show up?
I think the way I describe it to my alliance is it's a balanced program of low-hanging fruit and spicy Mexican dishes. So we'll always look to provide ourselves with the income that we need and want our members to achieve, but also we want a little bit of spice as well. So we'll sometimes poke a bear that we know full well is capable of defending.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like the Mexican reference.
I mean,
Spice.
we have quite a fairly well-oiled machine. We go to a region, we scan the entire place, and then basically the idea being that we've got an idea of what the internal scans of those structures are before we start making war declarations. So for sure, we cherry pick, right? We pick the things that are going to give us the best bang for buck, but we also self-inflict things that we know we probably can't achieve to see what will happen.
Do you take into account the health of Eve and the funnel of new players coming in, and therefore avoid the really new players who won't necessarily who can't really participate and are just getting their feet into Eve? Or do you not care about the funnel of new players coming in and you pick based on your corpse needs?
Yeah, I understand that. It's a really important point to someone who's played this game since 2003 that I see it continue to be a success. And it's interesting because I was talking to Artemis earlier on in terms of preparing for the show, and I started to think about what we do now, and that was an interesting perspective to talk about. But actually, I've lived the game through all of the different horrors of being war decked and being camped and feeling the defeats and etc. that come along with it. And I think that I would approach this discussion from a point of view of the lost opportunity if people couldn't be attacked, if people essentially got a pat on the head in high sec and ushered forward,
Why do pirates always sound so charming? Because it seems like you're I mean, if we just look at this from archetypes, it seems like the poor defenseless guys that just want to do stuff in the game get picked off by people like you, and they turn out to be really nice. It's hard to hate you.
I think it's worth. I appreciate that because, of course, I'm a nice person. But the truth is that there's an element of understanding the data that's been provided to us. So if we look at the information from the CSM, it says that corporations that receive a war deck decrease their activity and then become that continues after the war deck has ended. And what I would like to understand is whether or not that is on their characters in HiSec, or whether that's their be all and end all of EVE Online. Because the perception I have from 2 years of doing this since Citadels were introduced is we can count on one hand the amount of times we came across a new player, a genuine newbie that was poor and defenseless. Does that make sense?
When you say came across, does that mean undocked or talked to you, or what does that mean? Because I'll admit my bias up front. At one point, I held the position of Senior Director Global Sales for CCP, and I was in charge of the funnel coming in. So it's a concern to me that persists to this day. I want to make sure new people are coming in. When you say encountered a new player, how did you encounter them? Because the CSM minutes talk about them not undocking and just stopping playing. And then you wouldn't encounter them.
It's a really good point. I don't know if it says in the minutes that it's new players. It says that it's corps that receive a war deck, so people that are based in HiSec, right? And it says a bit later on in the minutes that there's a correlation with war deck received versus number of players in the corps. So you could assume that a brand new corporation that's kind of unheard of is going to be an uninteresting target to a war deck group until they become either larger, where there'd be a more juicy target, or deploy structures in space. Now, from my perspective, because we're not mercs, we're there to kill citadels. We only attack we only attack people that have a citadel, right? So by default, you would probably argue, I think you'd agree, that that's a fairly advanced play style to go and put your structures up and spend all that money on that. I'm not sure how many newbies would be doing it, and from my experience, it's certainly very uncommon to find a brand new player that's decided to invest in Citadel infrastructure in HiSec.
To clarify, the quote from the minutes is Lebowski brings up the data which shows that it's not actually a lot of brand new players that are being war decked, because they are not worth declaring war on, most likely. Typically, it's more established corporations that get hit once they are big enough to be a target. This does, however, still affect new players such as in Karma Fleet, Brave Newbies, and so on indirectly through which corporations are being decked.
Well, while I was a CCP employee, I participated as a member of EVE University. So I've spent a couple of years in HiSec in that setting, and and that's both a lot of new players and structures in space. Although in those days it was star bases, not upwell structures, because this is some years back. And another person who spent time in HiSec is our guest, Commander A's. You were a CEO of a corporation in HiSec recently, not that recently, but fairly recently. Am I right?
Yes. So about a year and a half ago, I joined Bastion. After being war decked, I was actually the executor of the Lin Kuei Alliance. The ticker is LINKK. If anybody's want to look at it, we were up to 300 members, 300 characters. A lot of that was pulling people directly out of rookie systems. We received a war deck from one of the major groups. It persisted for a couple of weeks. We had about a 3-day period of off war, and then we got war decked immediately following that. And it was at that point where it was either I was going to quit or we needed to move, because it was not sustainable to maintain being in HiSec. And at that point, we had already lost 45 to 50% of the physical people, not just alts. So,
Yikes.
Like I look at these numbers and I go, this is what I've been preaching for the past 6 years, but you know, I really hope that they finally come around to actually addressing it, because it's going to be a huge issue.
When you say addressing, you're talking about addressing the war deck system in Empire Space?
Yeah, I think I mean, there's a number of different proposals on the table for how to do it. The War Deck group has come up with a number of different proposals that are good, bad, ugly. Some of them are fantastic. I actually saw one recently that was a fantastic way to fix it, which was just get rid of wars altogether and flag suspect for attacking a structure.
Let me give a little bit of background for our listeners who don't know EVE as well and are just enjoying the show. EVE takes place in a place called New Eden, which is divided up into sort of 4 categories of space: wormholes, high security space, low security space, and null security space. And it's the high and the low security space that are called Empire Space and are affected by War Declaration system. So we're just talking about the folks who live in that area. And then their suspect timer refers to people whom the Concord sort of police system in the game think are maybe causing an infraction and should be investigated or looked after in some way. And they give a certain level of agency to players to go and investigate them by making them flash yellow. Is that a fair description? Artemis, can you do better?
Mm-hmm.
That seems accurate.
I'm trying to add a little RP in as I go, but if you attacked a structure in HiSec without a war deck and flagged suspect, would you still be able to have the kind of gameplay that Mr. Taylor is describing for us? How would that change? How would that change your experience?
I personally, I would think it would be easier for them, because they'd be actually able to, without paying for wars, they'd be able to attack any structure in ISEC at any point in time. It might make it more interesting for who would show up or who knows to show up. If they come into system and there's 25 people who are flashing yellow and local.
Yeah, if the mechanics behind a war deck is you pick a corporation or an alliance that you would wish to declare war on. You pay a fee to the Concord police. You declare war on that target. A 24-hour waiting period ensues, and then the war becomes active, and both sides are able to shoot each other or shoot each other's structures. Does Wrecking Machine have any structures in space?
No, Canaris, we don't build castles. We work on the Viking mentality. You don't want to give something for someone to burn down.
So is reciprocation a possibility?
Well, anyone can show up to defend, right?
Well, who could they attack you as well? What could they attack?
Well, sorry. Are you talking about hypotheticals, or are you talking about what we currently have? I'd rather stick with what we have now.
All right.
So under the current mechanics, they would have to be a participant in the war or an ally within that war. So like a onlooker wouldn't actually be able to attack or help defend in the current mechanics, with the exception of they could pull suspect themselves and do things like logistics or fleet boosting, but they can't actually apply any DPS to anybody without getting concorded.
Or they could put in an assist.
Yeah, that would be my point
Yeah.
to Artemis. Is I mean, it's a great point, and I think that it's often overlooked, right? The point is that everything in terms of a HiSec war is predetermined, right? So if a group, let's say Wrecking Machine, war deck some group, right, and say, okay, we're going to shoot your citadel, and our intentions are stated pretty quickly because we turn up the next day and shoot the thing, right? You get 3 timers if it's a high power citadel. You get 2 timers if it's a low power citadel. And what that means is that you have an opportunity to mount a defense. That's the point of the system. So they get 24 hours notice that a war deck is on its way, and they can then basically decide, how am I going to mount a defense? What's that going to look like? And my view, having spoke about it this morning and reading the Reddit post over the last few days, and I'm going to potentially upset some people here, but I think we need to call it when we have horses in the race. The war deck system isn't broken. I think we have a leadership issue within EVE Online. And if you think about the new guy that's got that idea to make a new corporation, firstly, Commander Aziz, it's amazing to see that you are making it in EVE. You're in a huge alliance as part of the Imperium, and I think you should be really proud of what you've achieved. But my point is that you made a decision. You took leadership and you were strong, and you made a decision which has moved you forward within the game. And I think there's quite a lot of conversation now around putting wool around people. And the question I have is, what an opportunity lost. If you were left in HiSec to your own devices and you could just build up and build up and build up, what do you need to take a risk for? Why do you need to make a jump? Would you never met Caneros, right?
So I probably would have run into Carneros anyways, but at the same time, like, for one, I want to backtrack a little bit and say you are the ideal person that I would love to be in a war against if I was still in my HiSec group, because I had like thought process the whole thing.
Nothing to hit.
What's that?
Why? He has nothing to hit. All you could play is defense. You have no offense opportunity.
But if I was the defense against Wrecking Machine, that would be fantastic. We had fleets set up to defend our structures and everything. Not once were we ever attacked. Not a single one of my structures was ever even visited by an enemy pilot during a war for the 7 or 8 wars that we were in. And I'm sitting here and I devised like an ECM armor doctrine to just make it cancerous to try and attack our structures. And I brought out our Mauler fleet to assist with that. It was all set and ready to go. Like, I would be really excited to go into a war against you even with my old newbie group. And that's the gameplay that I think that whatever new system needs to maintain, because that's fun. That's, there's emergent gameplay there. There's a potential for an Apex battle. Given its HiSec, so the Apex is a little bit smaller than nullsec, but it's still fun nonetheless.
A couple of things. One, you can always get more people involved, right? You can always get more people involved. You just have to pick up the phone, make a connection, and that's what this game is. It's about community. It's about collaborating together. It's about building relationships that are wider than ourselves. And we've had to do it. We're one small group, but we still had to build relationships in terms of needing support. We've shot Citadels where Test Alliance and Pandemic Legion have turned up to defend. We're 25 guys sitting in the station, and there are 200 bad guys outside, right? So the illusion that it's not something that can be defended against is just that, right? The challenge is, I think, that people don't want to make those kind of connections in a social game. The game is a persistent world where PvP is applicable across the board. So the first thing you should do if you want to make a corporation is start building connections with people. And I think that is where people struggle in the war depth situation.
I think the other specific challenge when it comes to HiSec is you are looking at a much more casual set of players. They're the type of player that's going to log in, maybe do some mining. They're going to aim for their specific content that they really want. So, I'm going to log in, I'm going to make some money doing some incursions, or I'm going to log in, do some mining, or things like that. Generally speaking, under a war deck condition, it's really a bad idea to go out in a level 4 mission running ship or an incursion ship, because they're blingy ships, generally speaking. You can bring the bling factor down, but you're going to make less money. And the challenge there is that they start losing out on that content. And I'm not saying against you guys specifically, but you get a war deck from Marmite or Pirate or VMG, those guys are occasionally going to roam out of the hubs, and they're going to cause, if you lose one faction battleship to one of those, you're guaranteed for another week of war at least, because that payoff that they just got from that kill now makes it worth them keeping you war decked for many, many more weeks if they want.
I'm not sure if I get that argument. I mean, if you look at EVE as a whole, if you lose a Rorqual in a system in Delve, someone's going to stay there camping it, right? That's just how it works. If you lose something in LowSec, then people are going to be sniffing around with alts looking for a fight. I think that it's important to understand as well that we all have a horse in this race. So you're describing your corporation from when you were building it up in Empire, but the truth is, every single player of EVE Online has an interaction with Empire, and we all have an opinion on what should and shouldn't be done up there. When actually we all started in the same place, we all have lived through these emotional journeys, and I think that it's important to preserve that, because it's part of what makes us the great EVE players that we are today, right?
Now, you mentioned leadership and the role that your corporation has in HiSec affecting leadership of corporations in HiSec. Do you feel like you're helping teach a lesson to HiSec leaders? Are you helping to encourage people to step up and take leadership? Because I think it's maybe there isn't I don't believe there's like an abundance of leadership waiting to take a role in the game. I think people have to be encouraged to do it, because it's hard work and it's not all fun. Are you helping improve? Tell me about why you brought up leadership.
I'm just reading that they're going to bring somebody else on. Do you want me to answer it in a second?
Oh, okay. Hang on. We have a surprise guest coming, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, I'll drag him in 1 second. This is going to be Nikolai Mazenkov from.
Oh, it's Nikolai Mazenkov from Red versus Blue, or as we call it, RVB.
RVB, yeah. Let me drag him in here.
If you don't know Red versus Blue, A, I'm surprised, but B, they are a long time, unique, well-known entity in EVE Online that lives in HiSec and is split into two alliances and is permanently at war with each other, generally always at war with each other on a friendly basis to practice PvP in HiSec together. Is that a fair description?
Hello, and yes.
Welcome. Tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself and let them hear your voice.
Yes, and a little bit about RVB to flush it out a bit.
Well, so surprise guest today. Actually, I've been AFK for a little bit, but then caught all the banter, and I've been making my way back to the game this last week. And then I just caught Open Comms actually about an hour ago. It ended right before the show started. But essentially, Red versus Blue is two corporations that have been at permanent war. So the first iteration was very haphazard, not a lot of rules. I've actually talked to the founder earlier this year. He kind of came back to the game, or at least to Discord for a little bit. But basically, two corporations at war. The first one was 11 years ago in January. The second iteration is what we're on now with the current alliances and corporations. And we just had our 9th birthday of the Wardeck starting 2 weeks ago. But basically, it's a very good description that you gave. Basically, a lot of casuals, either new players getting their feet wet in PvP, or people burned out of the nullsec kind of F1 lifestyle, or whatever. You can come and go. We don't have APIs. We don't do anything like ESI now, but we don't have strict requirements. You can have alts, you can have mains, you can do whatever. We have rules, but basically just keeping the community on even keel is the main thing. But we've been in a lot of wars, both with and against a lot of the kind of traditional war decking or mercenary alliances. LowSec, NPSI, all that kind of stuff together, unified as purple. Whereas in HiSec, our mutual war deck allows us to fight each other pretty much uninterrupted whenever we want. If you want just a 1v1, or if we have, a brawl or event where we just, get in a certain roughly even ship size type number and go at it.
So we've got a situation here where RVB uses the HiSec War Declaration system in a specific way that may not be what most people picture when they hear war declarations in HiSec. And
Right.
it's possibly not something that CCP envisioned. You represent emerging gameplay.
It absolutely isn't. One of the interesting things that has I've been doing a kind of history thread on kind of the opposite side of what Matterall has been doing with his Continuum of War, where he's focusing on like the big epic battles and the huge wars and things like that, like the things that are going to make the books. But focusing more on our side of things just for internal history. And one of them is CCP Rise before he was CCP. Was Kill 2, but one of his things was he now thinks it's interesting. So I actually confronted him once, but it was pretty funny. But it's definitely, a lot of them see it as awesome and genius, and we actually have had several CCP devs, either before they were devs or even currently, that have come and gone from RVB just to try it out. But when he was Kill 2, he made a remark where it was, something about being fake and not real, and just kind of, not because it wasn't the way things were intended. Just an oddity that he didn't particularly care for at the time. But
you're saying artificial, like RVB is just artificial gameplay,
which is funny because yes, there's a lot of artificial kind of setup to it, but it's very real. As far as the PvP and the tactics go, because of just the nature of it, there's a lot more small gang and solo than people might think. And I think that is what leads to some of our veteran players are so focused on like real piloting and not just, kind of the F1, which, you could say is artificial PvP in its own right.
In some sense. What you're saying is arena play, right? And there's a lot of people who are proponents of that. Like, hey, I just want to get in, I want to get the fight on, and I want to get out. I have limited time. I'm a grown-up. But that's like, I don't know. I think that it would be like, chicken fighting or cockfighting, in these little obscure areas. They're part of the bigger world. But they're isolated. Don't you see like there's a difference between like, hey, this is emergent gameplay. If you just make arranged fights, that's like a little fighting pit in some, abandoned building.
Which is interesting because a lot of the people that might have words to say against that or have done so in the past do the same thing. There are nullsec entities who are like, oh, we don't want to go to war, but we'll take a 100-man fleet and hope we get a good fight in so-and-so space, a region or two over. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea of saying, hey, we want to fight, you want to fight, let's get it on.
There's nothing wrong with emergent gameplay either. That is part of the design of an MMORPG, and particularly a sandbox one. That is just as valid as what they had in mind when they designed it.
You consider that emergent gameplay then, Carneros?
Well, a couple things. Attacking structures as a specialty, emergent gameplay. Ongoing, continuous war deck, emergent gameplay. Forming up in large fleets with this level of organization, that with specific doctrines and SRP, the emergent gameplay, absolutely. The world I live in is emergent.
It sounds like you guys really like war decks.
Well, one of the things I would say, just to kind of comment some of the things in the Twitch chat as well. I don't think we should, and we won't be an excuse for any kind of current or future war decks. We're very much, I mean, the mutual war would go away if war decks were paused or changed or anything like that. But we'd find a way to get what we need. But we absolutely understand some of the issues with war decks, but we don't take part the same way that a typical blanket war deck or structure bashing kind of setup would go.
Yeah, I like what Unsung Caspool says here. Collateral damage. So your gameplay would be sacrificed for the greater good.
In a way, yeah, we would honestly would probably set it down for a while or something. But honestly, I would say something like NPC nullsec or wormhole space would be it would make logistics suck really, really bad. But it would be.
Well,
doable.
You could just like an industrial corporation could hire mercenaries to protect them. You could hire logistics to help you get the stuff you need.
I think
Right.
Listen, I think it's really interesting because we've got a really interesting panel here, and it's so nice to see Commander Azaze surviving what was a harrowing experience. But the truth is, everybody on this panel lived through that. Everybody on this panel is somebody in this game because of the system that you grew up with. And I can guarantee you, having been here since 2003, that the system you grew up with had war decks in it. You have been touched somewhere in your experience by a war decker.
Yeah, but we moved out. That's how we dealt with it. Like, we hated the small town that we were in because of those kinds of trappings. So we went to the big city and, where we basically moved out. So
I get it. And Matterall, right? If you go from there to Lowsec and then all of a sudden, I don't know, Shadow Cartel or Snuffbox are on your doorstep blowing up your Pocos, what do? Well, you either achieve the level you need to achieve to fight them, or you move on, you move up again. And that journey of disappointment, followed by strong leadership, followed by good decisions, is what leads people to coalitions, null blocks, being part of a massive something, being proud of what you're part of. That journey only happens with the negatives, and you have to have the negatives in the game in order for things to move forward.
Yes, but do we need it to winnow down to 1 in 1,000, or would it not work just as well to have it be 1 out of 10 make it through? Right now, if you knew how many people start an account in EVE and log in once and then don't go any further, that funnel is very, very rough. And narrowing it further, that's a harsh thing.
Okay, so I understand. I mean, we don't have the numbers, Caneros, but by all means, share them with us if it's really bad news. But what we saw in the dev blog is they talked about player corporations in receipt of a war deck getting a reduced activity, which continues after the war deck has ended. And that's a concern, right? But the question goes back to, who are these players and what are they doing with their time? Are they stopping playing in HiSec, or are they stopping playing altogether? Are they leaving the corporation, going back to NPC? Because, of course, that invulnerability exists. If you want to do PvE in HiSec, you can do it all in NPC Corp. There's no limitations. So I think that's important to understand. And if we change the mechanics now, we will have a different panel of 4 or 5 people sitting here in 5 years' time.
Could we make changes to the system in such a way that it continues to support the good parts of what you're doing and the good parts of what RVB is doing, but has less impact on the incoming funnel?
Well, I think there's good points on both sides here, but as long as there's some way for us to do a mutual war deck, we're not even a real entity in the discussion. I've been asked a few questions by CCP when they gathered the data, because they started, I want to say it was about January. They started asking a lot of people, and I gave them a few contacts and gave them some information myself. But I think, Carneros, you bring up the issue of the risklessness when people don't show up for things like structures. That's not necessarily Wrecking Machine, because if you commit to attacking a structure, you do. But there's whether it's pipe camping or trade hub camping or things like that, where you're just looking for. I mean, my 2-man alt corp, my first alt corp that I made, had 2 people, and they saw one of them flying through space, and so he just dropped corp. But that also goes to the other side. That what are the actual stories behind each one? How many of them are just dropping NPC corp? How many of them are alts? How many of them are actual players on their main who are quitting versus diverting their activity or their characters elsewhere? And I think both sides need a look.
I will remind our listeners that dropping from a player corp to an NPC corporation reduces that player's bonds in the game, social bonds, and it's the social bonds that make the EVE experience sticky.
Right.
So that's an important factor, and we do want to encourage them.
It was brought up earlier about the CSM 10. I believe it was 8, 9, or 10, where both Jane and Mangala Solaris from RVB for Mang, and then Spectre Fleet for Jane, where they brought up the idea, and this is, I mean, years ago, where they brought up the idea of social corporations, where it's it's been talked about a little bit today. If you don't own a certain number of players in your corporation and you don't own structures in space, you get basically a war deck immunity, but you have the higher taxes of an NPC corp. So like you said, you get the social aspect of the game, but you have some of the, and this is just one of the, there's probably a half dozen major ideas for how to possible fixes for this, but
the corporation would get the taxes, so it wouldn't be bad for them unless it's taxed.
It's kind of like in HiSec, it's different for POCOs and other things where, right, some of it goes to the corporation and some of it is just NPC tax added on top.
That's a terrific suggestion. If you wanted to make NPC corporations, but basically player run, they would just have all the disadvantages of NPC corporations. That's
right. Basically, encourage people to only use them for that social reason, because you can't really start a giant, an industrial conglomerate with, structures and all that stuff. Which is another big side to the issue, is you can't really hit pause without a lot of collateral effects when you've already introduced POCOs for the last 6 or 7 years, and then you have Athenors now and all this other. There's a lot of things that come to play where a lot of people stand to lose or win hugely if you pause for a month or 6 or however long it takes to fix the issue.
I once went on a
It also speaks a lot to trying to grow a group, because that's probably the biggest problem in HiSec is getting to the right size where you can be effective in other areas of space and actually make a go of it. Like my goal for my alliance was to move to Null, whether it be, renting space or being somebody's pets at first, but, getting out there, getting established. But the challenge is always making money. And you have to have that time, even with a larger group. I had 300 characters in the alliance. At that point, it really doesn't matter, but you really have to be able to build up that cash, and there's not that much cash being generated in HiSec.
But who controls them?
Right. Well, I think it just depends on what, on how you're earning it. What your focus is definitely important, because things scale differently. It's definitely not Rorqual type stuff, but I mean, people multi-boxing incursions or missions or things like that. But you bring up a good point. To the conversation earlier, you either join with or affiliate with some group in HiSec while you're in HiSec, or some people would kind of be sponsored almost, where it's you have that progression. You start out as a HiSec corp, but you kind of know where you're going, and then you move to LowSec or NPC Null, and then to Sov Null, but you kind of have a direction. But I don't think at least as many corporations doing that now as maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Just a couple of points on this. I think it's important, because I'm a big fan of EVE Online, right? And I know you guys are. We have to call out when we know that the mechanics exist. So right now, if you're in the scope, you have a corp chat with 183 people in it, right? So in terms of
Right.
social interactions, it's there. In terms of people bonding together outside of player-run corporations, you just need to go to any 0.5 system in HiSec and you will find 20, 30, 40, 50 people mining together with orcas, with the mining barges, etc. And they're only vulnerable to ganks because, of course, that mechanic
Right.
exists. These people are forming bonds. These people often have structures that will be on an alt corporation, so like a Tatara for compression or whatever it might be. And recently in our campaign in Larry in Tashmerkon, we came across the community. It was really quite interesting to see them all band together and heckle us in local and people saying they're going to do this to us and that to us and so on and so forth. And actually, it was a one-man corporation Citadel that we were shooting, right? So on the face of it, you can think, oh, look at these big guys attacking this little guy. But actually, local was 100 plus while we were shooting this structure. It's just they had chosen to avoid WardX by being in the existing game mechanic, which allows it, which is a NPC Corp. So there's that element. The social bonds I get, but I think we have to broach the subject of, is it okay to just start a corporation if you don't have a plan to lead those people? Is it okay to sit in a system and recruit people to your corporation if you don't have a plan for all the eventualities that might come across? And I'm not suggesting they should know all the answers now on day one, but they should have a capacity to learn those nuances, because they're going to face more defeat and more negative stuff throughout their career in EVE. I've had more disappointment than hot dinners, and some of it still hurts. But the truth is, what gets you forward is you get back up and you dust yourself off and you make a plan, right?
Well,
I will definitely agree to that. But
apparently
at the same
people aren't coming
time,
back, though. That's why we're talking about this. There are people who slowly stop playing the game because they're told to dock up, not get killed, and feed the appetites of people who are attacking them. And if you break the habit of playing EVE, they start to say, I think I'm going to play something else. And that was what was presented at CSM Minutes that was so compelling. The CCP did some studies. They said, oh yeah, new players aren't really attacked by this as much as possible. But wow, look at this data. It's overwhelming that people stop playing the game when they are assaulted in an unexpected area to be assaulted, which would be high security space where you should play the game without having to worry about getting your stuff killed all the time.
But again, to the defense, what are these players like? We don't know that what's behind that data. We don't know the second or third, tier behind that. How many of these are alts? How many of them are not new players? And
I'll just say the stats say that people stop playing, whether they're nullsec players that have. Oh, you're saying the alt stops being used.
Right. Well, this is raw data. There are X hundred or X thousand players, corporations, wars, whatever. We don't know the numbers behind it. But the other part, it's just, well, I lost my train of thought.
Can I just say before Mitch jumps in? Well, one last thing. I think CCP would see through that. I don't think they would present CSM the data if they said, we're not sure if these are alts or not, but these characters stop being used. So let's assume.
Oh, some of it.
Yeah.
Based on the conversation when we were asked about some of the numbers and some of the interactions with WardX, the mechanics, and the giving and receiving, a lot of it was just raw data. Like, I think they understand the idea that a lot of it is, but they don't have the numbers to say this is how many are on a account that is linked to another player who is in nullsec, lowsec, somewhere else, something like that.
I think Matterall really nailed it in terms of these people are stopping playing because their leadership are telling them to dock up and don't fight, right? And that comes back to my point is that people have no business making corporations if they don't want to make a plan to defend or to fight or to move out or to hire a merc or to ask for assistance. Whatever the plan is in a social game where PvP is intrinsically linked with every single system in the game. I think in the user manual, the original user manual, it says some player just shot me, 0.5, 0.3 is allowed. In EVE Online, any player may attack any other player if they choose to, no matter where that happens to be. This is because EVE Online is essentially a PvP, player versus player game at its core. And that is what has driven 500,000 people to play it. That's what makes us enjoy the game, is that it's a PvP experience. And the risk is that there have always been calls in my 15 years playing for people to have SimCity Online. They want to just do spaceship building, they want to do structure building. And unfortunately, if we remove Wardex, then SimCity Online is what we will get.
What's wrong with that? I mean,
Very well, in a lot of ways, beyond planetary production.
Minecraft does very well. What's wrong with a section of the game?
Minecraft isn't Eve.
Yeah, what are you talking about? It's not Eve. They have our art director that created Eve. They have Torfy. So it's not that different. It's an open world, danger in the world experience where you get to build stuff to either protect yourself or just to make a farm.
But
I don't
beyond
see how that gameplay is eliminated.
When you're talking about NPC production, it's NPC production and planetary production and things like that are that. But everywhere in between, whether it's hauling or anything, I'm going to oppose that view. And that's where I got derailed earlier, is the thought that how important leadership is, because somebody brought up, I don't remember if it was earlier on TIS or if it was on Open Comms that I watched, an hour ago. But the idea, one of the arguments that happened earlier this year, somebody, there was some griefing, some doxing, anyway, yada, yada. But what leaders teach new players as normal is hugely important, not just on a social aspect, but as a retention mechanism. If you teach people that something is normal and you teach them how to deal with it, it is 100% different than if you teach them, oh, well, I'm going to quit and I'm the CEO, so you're not going to get anywhere without me, and you should just stop playing for the next month as well. And I've seen both sides of that. I've seen a few players where they're like, hey, I'm kind of on an ISK earning month, so I'm going to stay in RVB. But if we get war decked, I'm going to have to drop corp, and we're totally fine with that. But then there are other corporations where it is kind of what the CCP data has shown. And, somebody tells them, oh, well, you need to dock up or you need to do this. There are solutions to these issues that are not.
Well, let's go back to the mechanic for a second. We've got calls to fix something that's broken, with the idea that broken is based on just the data presented by CCP to the CSM. Right. Just on that. That doesn't mean necessarily a binary decision of, do we have a Wardex system or do we throw the whole thing out? There is a gray area in the middle whereby we take the existing system and change it, but keep something.
Right, but that's not what was suggested. The suggestion was, this is so bad, we need to just push pause for however long we need to.
Those numbers are serious, but we can take a moment here on this show and say, how could we change the Wardex system such that it still supports cleanup of unnecessary structures in HiSec? Although you haven't said yet whether you do any of that. Are you only attacking structures that are in use, or do you also sometimes do cleanup and get rid of the trash that is cluttering the landscape?
Sorry, is this for me, Canonis?
Yes, Mitch.
Yeah, so we shoot any structure really that's of value. I mean, some things run out of fuel and they become low power. Some things people stop logging in, or they stop being interested in it, and it goes low power. But it depends on the value of the structure and the interest of it, I suppose.
So is there a design we could have that would allow for this gameplay to continue to some degree, and that would support what's the word? The sustainable growth of leadership in EVE, that would support the, possibly the RVB model, although they wish to be kept out of the discussion, and I recognize that, but doesn't have the same choke on the incoming funnel.
I think we're going about this problem in the wrong way by doing that. So we've identified that the system is broken. The reason we think the system is broken is because it is negatively impacting player retention. But so far, we just know that something about the system gives us that outcome. We haven't yet identified what about the system gives us that outcome. Is it the fact that the majority of these war decks happen where there's nothing for the defender to retaliate with, right? They can't fight back for the most part. Is it because they are outmatched? They have the wrong ships? Is it because they're just giving up? Is it because they're alts and so they shift their activity to another character? We haven't nailed down what part of the system is causing the problem. And I think if we go and try to create a new system to preserve certain aspects of gameplay, we're going to inevitably miss something. And that's just going to create even more problems, not to mention we're not even sure if our new system will still produce the same problems we have now.
Well, I think somebody brought up the War Deck project earlier, and I think that is a major source, because even if there are, 3 or 4 major ideas on how to fix, like 3 or 4 just conceptual, families of ways to fix war decks, we can also narrow it down to there are 3 or 4 major topics about war decks that we know because they've been around for so long, because it's, this is a problem, but CCP, because it's so entangled with everything else in EVE, it's been kicked down the road for years and years without getting an iteration done, that we can name, I think, the top 3 or 4 things that are a problem with the current system. And off the top of my head, I would say neutral logi, the farming of people in HiSec, especially on trade hubs and in pipes, where somebody doesn't have, if you look at the kill board for most war deck corporations, it's going to be, there's the ones that have structures, there's the ones that do structures and individuals, and then there's ones where everything you see is a venture or a hauler or something. It's just somebody caught straggling, because we haven't had major structures attached in a long time in RVB, but they'll still pick off a straggler that's going shopping in Jita in anything but a Frigg or a Cloaky, or somebody who doesn't have an insta undock, properly labeled.
I thought our VB had a policy about going shopping in Jita.
We do, but there is no longer. There used to be a fine, actually. So
that's what I remember.
There used to be if you got potted or if you got killed in Jita, you owed Corp basically what you lost, but that has been rescinded. Now we just laugh at you and shake our heads.
The one problem with removing war decks that I see is that you continually take away the cool and interesting things that EVE has that you can talk to other people about who are maybe interested in playing EVE. And to say corporations can fight corporations is a mind-blowing idea. In the future, everything's owned by corporations and they can fight each other for wars. That's a cool thing. But your logistics thing cracks me up too, because I think that would be neat too. Like if you're a freighter and you get attacked in HiSec, NPC logistics come to your rescue and start to try to heal you, and then it becomes a tug of war over your freighter. And they should really weigh that towards NPCs being able to save you, especially in higher end systems. Like that kind of thing, I don't think it's overly complicated. I think it's cool, and you can describe that to other people saying, look how interesting and unique this game is. So there are different solutions than just taking it away. I just don't think there's anything in the short term that would prevent that from happening.
Right, and you bring up a good point, is how standings or NPCs might play into the situation. But it's definitely not an easy solution, but there are major parts of the problem that I think could be solved in a relatively short period of time without saying, let's chuck everything out with the bathwater and just scrap the system for an indefinite period of time till we fix something that we don't know.
I honestly, I think that understanding what horses we have in the race is really important. And the reason I keep saying that is because we've had recently in discussions about war within EVE, a kind of an anti-war stance from the majority of the players, and that changed recently, where people started saying, well, actually, what about these new players? And I think that's sorry, guys. I think that's something that we have to all accept, is that we all have a stake in this, and our characters are in HiSec as much as new players are, and that is going to colour our view of what should be done.
let me channel Dirk McGurk. You guys are a small population, and for the greater good, we need to infringe on your play style.
Well, you bring that up. One of the sides that you'll see if you hang around the War Deck project is people who are still hanging on to things like the old watch list system, which they say it destroyed the valuable aspect of mercenary corporations where they actually hunted targets using the watch list and using locator agents and things like that. Whereas now you see, and they blame the removal of the watch list and the problems with locators as the reason that there is a blanket camping of, Jita Amar, Didixi, and, Widama and, other pipeline systems versus kind of an active attacking structure.
Well, I mean, the overall thing, because there seems to be very archetypal reactions to this, and that's why it's a hot topic, I think, and that is, hey, Pansy, you can't just live in high sec and not be interrupted. This is Eve where you're up for grabs everywhere you go.
Yeah.
And then the opposite is like, God, can I catch a break? I mean, I'm just starting this game. I'm trying to get a feel for it. I've only been playing 6 months. I'm liking my progression, and you guys are constantly interrupting my progression. Why should I bother playing this game? I'm going to play something that's fun.
It's a really good point, I think. Would that happen once they get out of high sec?
They're mentally prepared for it at that point.
So it's the illusion of safety.
That's what I'm saying.
Really, right.
If you take away, because what you're saying is basically catch a break, right? Can't we catch a break? Is there some invulnerability we can have? But the point is, would they get that once they leave high sec? Because at the moment they've got potentially no breaks, right? Because a war deck can keep coming. But in the big scheme of things, if we were to compare, I don't know, Test Alliance being completely invaded by the Imperium, right? As a kind of a nasty thing happening to them, right? That's fun for the aggressors, but not fun for the defenders. And they probably didn't invite it. They probably don't want it, but they're getting it anyway, right? So if that's happening, in comparison, a war deck against a corporation is something fairly low level, isn't it?
I think you bring up a good
that
point.
went on for months at Eve University. Months and months of no break in war decks.
And that's true. I think Eve Uni and RVB, I think, besides the major war deck groups, are the people with the most experience in this. That you bring up a good point about what the mentality is and what the thought process of nullsec wormholes, like what is more dangerous in actuality versus what is your belief on your safety in different securities or even in different corporations in space.
I can talk about Eve Uni a little bit because we were in Canada or somewhere and we were shooting some structures, and this guy turns up and says, oh, hey, and he was an Eve Uni player. He said, these are our learning structures, right? And I said, oh, okay, cool, no problem. So what can we do for you? And he said, well, because we're learning, so, let us catch a break, right? And I said, well, no, because you're going to learn about the mechanics of the Citadel, right? You're going to learn about defending it. You're going to learn about the different tactics you can use. And this group, Eve University, have got far more numbers at that point than we did. So I thought it was a great opportunity to press ahead and give those guys an opportunity to learn about what they were doing. But the truth is they didn't. And the guy said, no, we're not interested in fighting. I said, well,
we just want to learn how to anchor.
Well, but they can. Look, they can make an agreement with you to say, look, this facility we need for markets to get our guys into ships, to help them with exploration. But this forward operating base is up for grabs for people who want to try to defend it. Would you say okay to that deal?
I think if they'd given us something other than we don't want to fight, bearing in mind that we are all playing a PvP game, yeah. If he had said anything other than we do not want to fight you, then I probably would have entertained some kind of reparations, some kind of opportunity for him. But
like get it into half structure and then just kind of leave it at that point once you see a fight happen instead of, hey, please don't.
The point
let me I'm going to take you back.
I want to challenge something quick.
Yeah, is this a PvP game? Is something that we need to talk about.
Yes.
But go ahead, Commander.
It's not.
That's actually what I was going to challenge.
You're not putting up anything to fight over.
His ships are on grid, aren't they?
His ships are not. Have we ever seen a pitched battle? Do we ever
Right,
do
in high
battle
sec?
reports?
Yes.
No, between Wrecking Machine and Defenders and actual battle?
Of course.
Or is it all just ganking?
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
put,
there
we,
is. There are.
we put our stuff on the line every single night, and anyone
And-
can assist against it.
And you stay and fight if they show up with a fleet?
Well, okay. This is a really good point. So, the EVE Online, people often say to me, what's PvP? How does PvP work? How do I get better at PvP? How do I get more kills? And I'm not a great PvPer. I'm a decent CEO, but not a great PvPer. And so I always say the same thing. EVE Online is ganks. Yeah, EVE Online is ganks. If you see 10 guys in battleships, you're going to take your carriers. If you see 10 guys in carriers, you're going to take your supers. And no one is going to a fight that they can see as an opportunity for PvP.
You should try it.
With exactly the same
It's more
amount
fun
of people.
than it sounds.
Nobody.
Whoa. Hold on.
It's maybe 1%.
It's really important. Yeah, I've done this stuff, right? I've been in I guess the nullsec boots, if you like, right? I've been in the massive fleets, and the truth is that nobody is planning to lose. Nobody's going for the honourable 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2 or 4 versus 4. The truth is you're looking for an opportunity to win because it's a competition, this game. It's not a fluffy little plaything for people that want to avoid all content or any combat. So it's really important that if your question was, would you stay and fight? No, if we're sitting on a citadel, we're the aggressors, we have 15 ships, and the aggressor turns up with 50, would you stay and fight out of some kind of noble?
If they turned up with 15 or 20, would you stay?
Of course. If it's a fight that you could have the chance to win, then of course you would stay and fight. That's how you play.
But it's where you draw the line. There are some people who are purely on the side of gank. They're like, let's drop a super on anything, or let's only fight if we have 30 nesters docked up and ready to get out there. It's where you draw the line, because I think you see whether it's RVB or a lot of small gang or solo types, you'll see a lot more of that. The more risk being played, but just to get it.
I would personally argue that the most fun in EVE is when you actually PvP, you're outnumbered and you still win. That's
right. It's when you think you're gonna lose or you have a good chance of failure, but you pull it out. And I would agree.
It's a personal judgment.
If you're choosing to do that, it's a good way to get really poor. That's basically how you get really poor in EVE Online.
You get really poor, but you have more fun. Like I've never had fun spinning an expensive ship, but I've had fun losing one. And yes, I'm a lot more poor than I should be because of it. But I've had a lot more fun than some people have had playing this game twice as long as I have.
Hard to quantify if you've had more fun. And maybe people
I will quantify it unless,
No, you can say that, but you don't really know. And the other thing is that you don't even know what fun is. I'm not saying you specifically. I'm saying anybody, because you're saying it's not fun unless your adrenaline's going and you're fighting, right?
All right. I'll see you at Vegas.
Do you think
shit faced and have a cage match? I guess
I don't drink, so it'll be hard to get me to that place. But you see what I mean? Right there. Like EVE Vegas is about partying and drinking, and that's what's fun there. Why else would you go? And there are guys that show up with book notes or with notebooks and sit down and take in the information that's being given, because their fun doesn't have anything to do with drinking and partying and getting shit faced or anything.
I'll give you that, but I would say a majority of players will admit, though, that there are situations that are more or less fun when they talk about, like, oh, this was an F1 monkey fleet where we totally murdered 500 guys and we didn't even break a sweat. I barely had to listen. I was multi-boxing. I was, barely listening to comms or whatever. Versus, we were doing this thing, whether it's, the Alliance tournament or a solo fight or a more even situation.
A lot of people, of course, they're totally into that. But, one of the biggest corporations in EVE doesn't have anything to do with that. They're explorers, and they don't even like to PvP except in defense. They have done it, and they're retiring into, thousands of them, just exploration and the whole science fiction apparatus. It's wrapped around EVE Online. So, the whole concept, this is a PvP game. That's what I would like to challenge myself. But I would also like to know, if I'm completely wrong about this, If
I would hang on.
Not willing to fight.
I would say that we have to be careful when we say PvP, PvE, what have you, because I think we're losing something by using those terms. And I think the thing that we're losing is the distinction between competition and cooperation and combat. So, like, PvP isn't necessarily just I'm pitted versus you. It could be I'm working with you such that I can achieve something greater than someone else. And I think when we just say PvP, we sort of reduce things down to I'm fighting you, I'm shooting you, I'm removing some asset that you have, such that only I am left with my asset or something of that sort. And the cooperation aspect is something that we cannot lose, especially when we're discussing these war decks and especially when we're discussing new players, because the cooperation and the interaction with other players is what keeps them in the game, which is what Carneos has been saying this whole time.
All right, conversation killer.
No, I can. I mean, look, I'm going to defend it. The PvP element of this game was written on the first box. It was on there, right? And it's in the instruction manual from CCP Games. I've linked it for you guys to have a look at. But the trick is, well, I'll give an example, right? So I watched a Twitch stream of Marquee Dragon earlier in the week, or maybe last week, and he was doing abyssal sites or something. He's doing some the drone sites, the new drone experience with his Nesta, right? And he's sitting there doing his stuff, and that's a PvE experience, right? So he's choosing to PvE. He's in high sec, and BBC or I think it's Snuffed Out or someone warp in a load of Taloses and they blow him up, right? He goes, "Whoa, what's happening?" And of course he explodes. And that kills the argument of what is this game, because he was choosing to do a PvE experience. He had no interest in doing PvP. He just wanted to stream himself doing the drone sites, which is cool, and people were engaging and having a lovely time. And he's a content creator, so even better. But the fact is, he can't sit there afterwards and go, "That's not fair. That's not fair. They killed me," because it's a PvP game. Any point you can be attacked, and Concord are only there to punish. They're not there to stop an assault or some kind of unpleasantness, and that is core to the game that we all play. That's part of what we play, and I think it would be really sad and a missed opportunity if it changed.
Okay, that's an excellent point. We're going to let you have the last word, sir, on this subject. We've gone on quite a bit. There are one or two other things to talk about briefly. Fair enough. Captain McLeod, could I trouble you for the Dotland map of the region of Cache? And could you show it to us in a way that we can look at the highlights for a moment? If you haven't seen this, guys, because you haven't been looking at Cache. I mean, who looks at the region of Cache, to be honest? But I shouldn't say that. That's
traditional homeland of Solar Fleet.
Of Solar Fleet, yes. And, we respect their longevity in EVE Online, a spaceship game.
But it's drone regions where basically things are kind of quiet as people go about their business harvesting the quiet areas of EVE. Is that right?
That is true. That's not really the map I was going to show. Can you show the Dotland version? You will look at it and you will go, wow, there are a lot of systems with a glow around them that represents, okay, there's two glows happening on this map right now. Damn it, put up the Dotland map. Green glow, oh dear. The black background's not going to show that well, and that's Cache. We want Cache. C-A-C-H-E, there. Okay, so if you look in the upper left, you can see a green glow, and if you look on the right side, you can see an orange glow. Mine has more orange glowing than yours, and I don't know why.
So that's because a bunch of timers just came out, like they've been coming out all morning. So some of them have just finished, and some iHubs and TCUs have been destroyed, so the systems are no longer glowing. It's because the timers are actively being fought over right now.
Okay, this is happening right now. You can get in your ship and burn over there now and see it all happening and pretend you can live stream it or whatever you want. If you're new to Dotland, the green glow represents an incursion area. So that's not a player activity. That is the evil Sanchas under Sancha Kuvakai attacking that area, and they need to be removed as part of the Sancha menace. All right. The orange glow.
So even they are invading.
God damn it! These people cannot take a break, catch a break, whatever the word was. On the other side, instead of the evil Sancha, we have the evil Skill Yourself. I'm just kidding. And instead of Sancha Kuvakai, we have Capq, who I spoke to briefly. He couldn't come on the show tonight. He had a prior engagement, but he did let us know that they do have a small group going through the area. They were highly disappointed not to get anyone engaging them in return. And they sort of escalated into continuing to burn since no one was coming out to fight with them. And at this point, they're deriving less satisfaction from the experience and feel like they've now turned into the garbage men, cleaning out the area. But that was his words. But they didn't have anyone to come get on the show with us. But I just wanted to point out that Cache is on fire. If you're going over there, dress accordingly. And hopefully, if this continues to be exciting, maybe next week we can talk a little bit more about it on the show.
Do we know if it's a whole group attacking or one guy?
Well, Captain Albosa had eyes in the area earlier today. Do you have a live report from the scene, sir?
Live report, as of a few hours ago, there were less than 10 characters roaming around in T1 Entosis cruisers. Just Entosising, no contestation. That was it. Just Entosis maulers and moas.
Well, at least
less
they
than
were
10
real
people.
Cruisers.
I do quickly want to give a shout out to, so I saw interesting things happening in Cache at the start of the week because a new alliance just out of the blue took Sov in Cache, and that was Damned Brotherhood. If I looked through their corporations, and the vast majority of them are just like PvE, somewhat PvP characters, and they just happened upon 3 systems in Cache. They just took them. And so then I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then suddenly Skill Yourself started showing up. And it's worth noting that not only are they burning the Sov, they're also dropping iHubs and TCUs for Circle of Hell, which is the renter alliance that currently owns all the Sov and Outer Passage. So this could become rental space if they decide to plant down roots. We'll see. At the very least, we've got Citadels dying to a single Super and a single Lashak, and a bunch of T1 Entosis cruisers rolling around uncontested.
Okay. We don't have anyone to talk on this, so I don't want to go into too much detail.
Can I throw a question, though, to Mitch?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Like, Mitch, you're looking for content, and there's 10 guys taking over an entire nullsec region. Why wouldn't you go and fight over there?
Hey, Matt Ross, sorry. So yeah, that's not the gameplay that we want. We've decided to use the mechanics as they are, and that works for us. It's important to understand that not everybody plays the game at the same level of intensity, right? So when we were a nullsec group, and when we lived in Fountain and Delve and Quirius and Paragon Soul and all these other places, my leadership of the corporation was really 24/7. I was online a huge amount.
Amen.
And that was something that I enjoyed at the time, and I could afford to do in terms of my real life checks and balances. But what I've found in HiSec, in the mechanics that we currently use, especially with Citadels, because it's all timer based, we play the game for like 45 minutes and we get our fix of EVE Online. What a treat, hey?
I'm hearing I don't have a logistics team. That's what I'm hearing.
No. I think the ISK is much easier when you're talking about the structure bashing too. If you haven't ever seen some of the numbers behind structure removal, some people pay way too much for that kind of stuff.
I think everyone as well. It's worth considering that what you see is not what you get in terms of HiSec. Very often the people that are being aggressed, maybe the station owners or whatever else, are somebody completely different. You know, they're not what they look like. Yeah. So we get people from the Imperium, we get people from NC Dot, we get people from Pandemic Legion that go, oh look, this is just my alt corp. It's my little side project. It's my little thing on the side. You know, come on guys, give us a break. And our answer to them is always the same thing. Well, then get NC Dot or Imperium or whoever to come and defend. And they go, oh no, they won't do that. They won't do that because you know, this is my little side project. Well, that's tough breaks, right?
Well, that's one of the interesting things that you bring up is it used to be Pocos, especially. This is one of the things that when Pocos came out, Goons and RVB basically owned HiSec Pocos. Now, if you look at it, it's mostly alt corporations. The only major structures that are owned by major entities are things like there's the perimeter trade hubs and things like that. Like Horde was a year ago fought over that issue, but you see these kind of things that you brought up that so much of it is it's just a side project, nobody really getting involved. People don't care as much or don't get involved with those bigger fights.
Let me pose that question because we're looking at it. People join a nullsec alliance. They put in their time to be able to have a side project, and yet the alliance that they join and put in work for won't defend their little situation that they're doing. That tells
their
me
alliance isn't getting kickbacks.
Well, some of it
purely
there's a problem.
The individual player.
Some of it with the both attacking and defense comes in with hiring mercenaries of some sort. Some of them will just, it's my side project. I can remain, basically, I'm behind the curtain, but I can hire somebody to either take out the competition or to defend my stuff or whatever. I know one of the major HiSec entities basically does that. Like you don't know who it is, but like unless you really do know the person. But they're able to pull in tens of billions without doing anything themselves because they just hire out the process.
It's a really good point, actually, because we talk about the noobs being affected, which I'm still yet to see the numbers on, whether it's new players or just players. But one of the biggest noob corps, of course, is Pandemic Horde. They've got a fantastic number of members, and they do a great job recruiting new players and training them and looking after them in nullsec. But they have 16 active wars currently, and 14 of them are their own. So it's not like it's all on one side. There's a choice there when a CEO or director pushes a button.
Here's the problem. I think this is for me, from my opinion, my perspective, the overall problem is that one of the things that attracts people to play, as I say over and over and over again, is the feeling of accomplishment and progression and investment in a virtual world. It's a powerful attractor to want to continue to play. And every time that you're trying to build an industrial base only by yourself because people can rip you off and rip off all your researched blueprints and stuff like that, so you kind of have to work alone, that any time that you're working alone and your stuff, your income, what you're measuring as your progression gets set back, then it is a disincentive to continue to do it, especially when the setbacks are larger than the progression. So you spend 3 weeks building something and your stuff gets taken away. It's like I just wasted 3 weeks. So you don't even have a little bit of progression. You have no progression. In fact, sometimes you even go backwards. In that kind of a situation, anything that takes away from your income, whether it be paying mercenaries or losing structures or getting ripped off because somebody what you trusted takes your stuff, or trying to convince, which is very rare, your nullsec guys that you give them your time to defend your thing, none of that stuff is going to add to the incentive to play if your stuff constantly gets its rewards taken away by all those taxes.
Well, it's something you have to gauge. You have to, how much effort do you put in, how much risk and how much reward? There's some people that if you accept it as a risk that, I'm going to end up paying 50% to the mercenaries, but I'm going to decrease the amount of effort I have to put into defending it by 100%, then it's totally worth it. Or if you know, I'm going to have to replace some structures every now and then, or let's say you say, I'm not going to do a POS or now a Citadel to do.
Yeah, but the mental space to computate the variables and how severe they can be is too big a task, I think, for most people. They want to see a
Spreadsheets are for.
progression. But we're trying to get away from putting that kind of burden on a guy who's casual, or
Yeah, I mean, I can. But if you're that casual, do you deserve that progression and that reward? If you're not going to go through the effort of actually thinking through the consequences, I mean, that's like saying, I'm going to take my armor battleship out into the Tamagate and
deserves the wrong word. It's framed in the idea that this is it's a PvP game, and do you deserve that kind of safety? You got to fight for it. And I reject that. I don't think that the game is just PvP at all. I think there's all kinds of different things that you can do in the game that aren't related to PvP. But
if you are good at what you do, though, you can avoid PvP in every situation if you desire to.
If you stay docked, you can avoid it.
We're going to avoid PvP in this situation by coming to an end with this episode. Thank you very much for joining us. I do want to tease for a moment next week's show, where we're going to talk, among other things, about a sneak preview of stuff that we'll see at EVE Vegas 2018. I'm excited about that. I know a couple behind the scene things. We'll talk about that next week. If you have, oh wow, thanks, Mitch. I just saw you declared war on the Bastion. I am logged in at the moment.
Hold on, I'm going to log in too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. We haven't had a war deck in a little while, so we were.
I thought it would be a nice parting gift.
Very kind.
Just before they take them away, right?
Very kind.
We should throw shade at the rest of the high-sec war deckers just to get the rest of them involved.
Yeah, go ahead and give me one too. Give Red.
Get them all done at once.
And then thank you for our guests for coming on. I very much appreciate it. Thank you to our supporters on Patreon and here in the channel on Twitch. I also want to point out there is talkinginstations.com if you want more information about this episode or other episodes. In particular, there's a special discussion in 2 parts there about the CSM minutes that came out this week. If you have not read through the entire document, it's long but worth your time. You can listen to this on your commute, for example. Download those episodes, and you'll get some great insights from our team. And thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week on Talking in Stations.